About a month ago, I was finishing leading an 8-day silent retreat for 20 religious sisters out in Washington, D.C. And at the end of that retreat, the superior of the community gave me a gift. Well, 2 gifts actually. One was this sweet and very touching handwritten note and cards signed by all the sisters with a spiritual bouquet, which has really given me confidence over the last month because they are offering for me 136 holy masses, holy communions, 136 rosaries, 106 divine mercy chaplets, 136 holy hours, 153 memoraries. Isn't that something? Man, if I don't become holy, it's on me. Like, all that's being offered. My goodness. So I've kept this little card where I wake up in the morning and say my prayers while I'm drinking coffee and do some spiritual reading. And then Sister Mary Agnes gave me this little Ziploc bag with, I guess there must have been 10 seeds in there. And I think it was meant to be a symbol. I don't fully know, but you came and you spread seed to us, and so this is a symbol back. And all of these seeds were painted, and I thought they were just decorative. And she said, no, plant them. And I don't do any planting. But I found a pot and some soil, and I took 3 of these seeds out, and I planted them. And I went away on vacation, and lo and behold, something was sprouting. Now my first thought, I'm the son of a father who grew up on the farm. And what a miracle growth is. And how far I am from that in the way my daily life is configured. Like, it was super cool. It reminded me of being in first grade, and the teacher had these little eggs and the chicks were hatched, you know? And we were fascinated watching that, like the miracle of growth. Secondly, though, already what sprouted up was starting to wither because I had been away and had not cared for it. There was no water. And it made me think of, like, growth is a miracle, and yet it demands that we cultivate it, that we do our part. I want to begin there as a little prelude to this gospel today. Scholars will say it is one of the most important parables that Jesus tells, and I'll explain why later. But it's familiar to us, and it's long, and I simply want to break the gospel up into 3 parts and to offer you a point for your own meditation and encouragement and growth for this particular week. The first part is Jesus just tells the parable. It's fun to imagine, isn't it? The crowd, it's so big he has to be in a boat, and he's teaching from the boat. And the first thing I want you to see is how generous God is. The whole point, you could read the parable like this. The sower, God, went out to sow. And he sowed, and he sowed, and he sowed, and he sowed. In fact, he's so generous, it seems like he doesn't even care where the seed is landing. You know, I think this is so radical in transforming our imaginations of who God really is. I find that so many Catholics spend so much of their life and time thinking of how to get God to be good to them and how to persuade God to give them good things. And Jesus is saying, this is actually who God is. St. Ignatius of Loyola would say, God is always ready and willing and giving more than we are ready to receive. So when we say God cannot be outdone in generosity, this is not a trite saying. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be leading 45 women for 3 days, 5 hours away into South Dakota for a silent retreat. And it's one of the first things I say, like, it's a victory that you're here. They all have to pull out of full lives. And I'm so convinced because I've seen it again and again, and I know and you know who God is. That if they're giving them 3 days, giving God 3 days of their time, you can only imagine what He has for them. You know, C.S. Lewis used to say, we often talk that the believer in this world has to be on guard because this world's fallen. And that's true. Jesus says all the time we have to be vigilant. We have to protect the spiritual life in our hearts because it can go away. But C.S. Lewis says, you know who has to be more on guard? The atheist. Because there are so many signs of the Creator, so many signs of His goodness, so many signs, expressions of His generosity. And so they got to be on life defending their unbelief. This leads to the second point. So the first, Jesus just tells the parable straight up. And then in between the explanation of the parable, there's this kind of interlude that can feel very curious to us. It's kind of hard-hitting, doesn't feel very just. He says, to those who have, more will be given and they'll grow rich. And to those who don't have, even what they have will be taken away. And then he talks about closed hearts. And well, here's why context is very important. This is the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. You know what came in chapter 11 and chapter 12? Growing resistance and rejection and even hostility to Jesus. They are so defending themselves against what He is giving them that they're beginning to plot. And this is interesting because up until this point, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus doesn't use parables. This is the first parable He tells in Matthew. So he's like trying to find a new way to the heart. And the whole point is a parable gives us the deepest, truest way of seeing our life and all of reality. But you know what it depends on? Your disposition, my disposition. Am I open? So if we take that seriously, one way to define faith at its essence, what is faith? Do you have faith? Are you living faith? Faith is fundamentally openness. I'm open to God, which also implies curiosity. I have wonder. And then that leads me to trust that my life is not my own. Not only am I bored, but I will never, ever be fulfilled and grow when I live my life holding on to it. Clenched fists, you know? I go into our 8th grade every week during the school year because it's my last crack at them, you know? It's my last chance with them. And then they're going off into Catholic high schools, public high schools. And do you know how I spend my half hour with each of the classes? With their questions. I'm not going to bring anything because actually, if we're not asking the question, answers don't matter. And I tell them, your questions are so good. They're a sign of your faith. Like if we never asked questions, it'd be a sign that our faith is dead. Or if we had questions and we didn't seek answers, well, then we'd just be stuck. I've never understood this. Isn't it interesting? Jesus says, I want you to understand. I want to heal your heart. I want to consecrate you in the true way to see life and to live life. I'm telling you, if you meditate on this section, it's kind of haunting. Jesus is experiencing again and again in His mission a closed human heart. And it would seem that even God, a powerful God, reverences a closed heart. As a priest said to me when I was discerning my vocation, even God can't drive a parked car. Do you know that the second biggest group of next to Catholics in this country are fallen away Catholics? Did you know that? And isn't that amazing? For me, it's kind of haunting and I don't think it would surprise Jesus. He was acquainted with the mystery of resistance. When we just don't want to be open, when we see his word as a threat to our comfort, to what we've built for ourselves. So faith, openness, curiosity, that leads to trust, that leads to walking in life in a whole different way. Okay, and then finally, he explains the parable. And based on these first 2 points, if God's generous and he's giving, even when we're not open or ready to receive, then it would seem that besides faith being openness and trust, faith is all about receptivity. It's all about being good soil. There's this great quote that I love, that the greatest human activity is to receive God. That's what Mary did at the Annunciation, right? Be it done unto me. It's what Peter and Andrew and James and John did. Follow me. They left their nest. They left their father and the boat even. And they set out. So it would seem to me, if it's all about receptivity and good soil of our hearts, that we would do well to just think and reflect each for ourselves on what are the obstacles in my life. Jesus names 3. He says, the seed, my word, my life, given generously, freely, again and again and again, sometimes falls on the path. And he says that's when faith doesn't move to experience and understanding. It's when a childish faith never matures. We're called to be childlike in faith, but not childish. My faith has to mature through the sufferings of my life, through the joys, through the different vocations God's called me to. Like my faith, I'm so edified by many of you beyond your weekly holy hour, which helps your faith to mature. The number of you who have like a weekly podcast, whether it's Bishop Barron, Word on Fire, Father Mike Schmitz, and you tell me about what you're receiving from them. And it makes my heart happy. Like, we need this. We need understanding. We got to be thinking about this. Love the Lord with your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. Secondly, Jesus says, some of the seed that I pour out generously falls on rocky ground. Like there's no root. We're living on the surface. It's superficial. The anchor is not dropped in communion with God. And so then, when tribulation comes, when I'm in a setting where it's not easy to live my faith or it's even disparaged, I fall away. It's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to do. It shouldn't surprise any of us. Jesus had already seen it at this point, and he could foresee it. And so it's worthwhile to say, do you have a moment in your everyday where you drop anchor with God? Yeah, I don't know what's going to come today. Could be rocky, windy. There could be some, like a roller coaster, like a little whiplash, But my anchor's dropped. And then secondly, he says, there's that seed that I give that falls among thorns. These are those who hear the word, but then worldly anxiety and the lures of riches choke it. You know another translation of this? The daily cares of life. So maybe you're a parent and you feel like, man, the season of my life is just getting my teenage children or just to one event to another. Take stock. You might get to the Lord and say, but Lord, I got them to every sporting event on time. Can you hear that? Can you hear how silly? But it's so easy to do. We just surrender in the wrong way sometimes to different seasons of life. And then we lose the treasure, the pearl of great price, our life, his life in us. Okay, I'll close with this, but we've got some new staff members, new people on our ministry team, and I found myself telling them this last week. I am so glad you're here. Now be free from any pressure, false pressure, to cause something to happen. You know how we can do that in any field, any job. We say, I got to make my mark. I got to, no. God is here. He preceded me here. He preceded you here. He is working. He's generous. Our whole task is to discern, to have eyes of awareness and faith to say, where is God already generously giving himself to these people? And then how do we support that? You remember what St. Paul says? He's like, you're arguing over who's better, me or Apollos. He says, look, I planted, Apollos watered, but God always gives the growth. My simple question to you, are you growing? The miracle of the seed. And if you're not, that's okay. But now's the time to forward momentum. Now's the time to say, how do I water that seed? Maybe it begins for you with making an active faith in God's generosity. God, I know you are giving yourself to me here and now. God, give me the grace to be open to you, curious and trusting, and help me to be good soil that's receptive to your word.